It is Friday, December 22nd. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another salacious episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. The December PS Plus Essential Games are still live on PSN, so make sure you claim those before they go away. Also, the PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium December lineup is now live on PSN as well, which we can finally confirm that, yes, both Thrillville games are indeed originally the PSP versions, so the PlayStation social media team did make a mistake by labeling one of those as the PS2 version, so that means we are still waiting for a brand new PS2 game to be added to the Classics program, and I thought that would be the case considering they didn't actually make a formal announcement that, hey, these games now have save states, rewinds, all that jazz, assuming that is what's going to play out, and I expect that will happen at some point, but right now we're still waiting on that, but you can go download and play those games. Now, getting into our first news story, though, a really surprising outcome, which is, if you remember, Sony sent out those emails about a lot of Discovery content being delisted from PSN, so if you bought a TV show or something way back when Sony was offering this on PS3, PS4, well, it turns out they worked out a new licensing agreement with Warner Brothers, the parent company for Discovery, and now that content is staying. So if you bought anything out of that huge list, then yeah, that content's not going away. I am really surprised. I thought for sure, like, okay, there's no outcome here where these come back or Sony's going to work out a new agreement, because it's a little bit of, well, we assumed it was a little bit of Warner Brothers not wanting to cooperate and take that content and keep it close to them, and also Sony for what is a retired program where they're not selling TV shows and movies anymore on PSN. You know, they are not going to care to renew this stuff, but actually they did. So, gotta admit, really surprising, but that was the right outcome for consumers that bought that content and have the rights to keep watching it on their PlayStations. Moving on to our next news story, PlayStation Japan recently confirmed that the new PS5 model is finally getting those new console covers on January 26th, which will be for the Deep Earth collection, so that would be the silver, the red and blue, which kind of have a pearlescent finish, and those will come out in Japan January 26th, which means the Western release probably is not too far behind, considering we know the new PS5 model is going to get console covers as well, so, and that would be sometime in early 2024, but that means your first initial option, if you happen to have the new PS5 model, is you can pick up one from the Deep Earth collection, so we'll probably have to not wait too long for confirmation of when they're launching in other territories. Next up, Sony Interactive Entertainment has confirmed in a new press release that PlayStation 5 has sold 50 million units as of December 9th of this year, which, for comparison's sake, that's about 1 week slower than PlayStation 4, which it was only a few months ago that PS4 or PS5 was trailing a few months behind PS4 in terms of a launch-aligned basis. So that's how quickly it's catching up. And during the press release, the president and CEO, Jim Ryan, said, and I quote here, "Achieving this PS5 sales milestone is a testament to the unwavering support of the global PlayStation community and their passion for the incredible experiences created by the talented developers from PlayStation Studios and our partners. We're grateful for all our players who have joined the PS5 journey so far, and we're thrilled that this is the first holiday season since launch that we have a full supply of PS5 consoles, so anyone who wants to get one can get one." It's like we always say with these stories, PS5 has been doing incredibly well, and that just seems to be a reoccurring headline, but now it is something where it can catch up with PlayStation 4. And at this point, we're waiting for their fiscal report for this current fiscal year, which, you know, we're in the middle of Q3, which is going to be very lucrative, so they're selling a lot of units. But I think it would be a safe guess that they're finally going to outpace PlayStation 4's rate of sale and perhaps get very close to their aggressive 25 million target for what they want to sell this fiscal year, which it seems like they might be a little bit behind that number of a full 25 million, but it's not like it's necessarily a bad thing when you've got triple-digit growth year over year from what was a still supply-constrained 2022. This really is a time where if you want a PS5, you can go get one, and that's we couldn't say that last year, and we certainly could not say that during 2021 or 2020. Moving on to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This was the cover issue for Game Informer this month, which it looks amazing, but that means Game Informer also went to Japan. They spoke with a lot of people at Square on the team, had some hands-on time, hands-off time, spoke with the director, so we have a lot of new details about this game. Let's go over some of the highlights. Director Naoki Hamaguchi did confirm that the world is open and connected, which, it's from a UI perspective, is where, if you bring up the map, you might see that separate areas are loaded separately. So in this case, they were talking about how during the hands-off demo that was taking place in the Junan region, which featured Junan proper and the grasslands. Those appear as separate areas in the UI, but they did confirm that it is all connected, and so you could traverse between them in-game if you wanted to. Now, there's also new cities that weren't in the original, and these will be an extension of the world and characters, in that you can visit these and take on side quests, and many of those side quests will feature secondary protagonists, which could be other party members, and doing those quests will expand the relationship between those two. So in this case, it was something where, Cloud and Red 13 were the primary characters throughout that side quest, and that is going to build the relationship between those two, and you can expect more of that going throughout the game. Also, there's a lot of mini-games. The two that they talked about for this preview was that, they didn't say a whole lot about this one, but there's a strategy card game that Cloud can play and build out a deck to face people throughout the region, so that's something you can do. And there's also a piano mini-game where Cloud can play sheet music from either the game's soundtrack, or you can do a free play, which it sounds like a member on the team was able to play out like something completely different, so it's like a full-featured sort of piano mini game where you can really have your fun with that. But as far as total content goes, Hamaguchi says side content is 80% of the exploration side, and if you happen to do the gold path and only the gold path, you can expect about 40 hours. Throw in some side content, that's 60 hours, and for those looking to do the most, it should top off at about 100 plus hours, which I would figure that, considering this is going to be a proper open world, the time estimates, I find this is the case with a lot of open world games, but those can be a lot more rough depending on, how fast you can go through these things, or, if you tend to take your time. Like, it's always something where the time estimates are a lot more accurate when games are linear. So with FF7 Remake, and that game is a lot more linear in nature, given it's also Midgard. But, that game, kind of similar numbers, right? It's like 35-something hours for the gold path, and you can bump that up to 50, 60 easily doing some side stuff, but if you try to do everything, you can, get a save file up to 50 plus hours. Some I've seen up to 60 or 70, even more, but like this, I feel like if we're shooting around the 100 plus hour number, then I think there's a lot you can do, but I am excited to hear about the sort of relationship building between the characters, and I think that's always like a prime area to really deepen the connections with those characters in a way that we were not able to get when the game originally came out all those years ago on PlayStation 1. So I think in terms of the new stuff they're adding, that is the one thing, like mini games aside, all the side quests, the new towns, okay, that sounds all well and good, but knowing that you're going to have all these sort of extra moments with these characters that we've known for so long, and getting to know them in a way we haven't gotten to know them before, that is a really exciting prospect. Now, Game Informer also had a preview for Rise of the Ronin, the upcoming PS5 third-party exclusive from Team Ninja and Koei Tecmo, and this is so far, I think, the most, thorough or detailed breakdown we've had about the game so far, outside of the trailers, which are clearly visual, so you can see what the game is, but we actually have a good idea of, like, what this game really is about, so we'll go over some of the key details here, which would primarily be that the game is set in 1863 Japan, where the game's events take place in the middle of the Bakumatsu period. The protagonist is a nameless Ronin who is a work-for-hire warrior called a Veiled Edge, and as we saw from the two trailers so far, the story and world is grounded in reality, so there's no supernatural elements. The story is steered by the player with a lot of narrative choices regarding conversations with NPCs or assassination targets, so you can kind of pick and choose who to spare, who to kill. There's not many branching story arcs as far as the gold path goes, but side missions and choices can lead you to a different ending overall, so there's multiple endings. In the gameplay department, the game's director, Fumihiko Yasudo, explains that the action can still be over the top like we've seen with previous Team Ninja games, but outside of the close quarter swordplay, parrying, the grappling hook, which that can be used offensively, the standout option is also Western firearms, and that does create an interesting dynamic when you also consider the game is still going to play with a learning curve for a lot of enemy encounters. Failures can be expected, and Yasudo does confirm that there is a progression resource called Karma that does drop after death. Interestingly though, there is also a traditional XP that is in the game that is going to stay with ongoing attempts, and we do know that the game will have difficulty options, which would be a narrative mode, normal, and hard. Hard being what you would normally expect from games like Neo or Wolong Fallen Dynasty. In terms of the open world, you'll be able to explore Yokohama, Kyoto, and Edo, which is Tokyo, and there will be plenty of countryside and rural towns you can explore in between these cities as well. Now, I'll tell you, that so far has been the best, not quite a pitch, but, you know, if you're looking to find out more about the game, I think that pitch does a really good job of finally conveying exactly, you know, what makes this game different from others. And I think this largely kind of goes into, like, if you were a fan of Team Ninja games to begin with, because that's kind of the two camps I'm seeing here, where it's like, if you played Neo before or Wolong, then you kind of know what you're getting into, and therefore there's a reason to be excited. But if you have not played those two games and you're just curious about this, but you just don't have a good idea of exactly what this game is or why it's different from, you know, these other samurai games, like, oh, you see this in Ghost of Tsushima, you go, okay, well, why should I play Rise of the Ronin, or why should this be exciting? So far, I think that breakdown has given us a really good idea of where this differs and what you can expect going into it, which, even for me personally, because I'm not too huge into Team Ninja games, I do enjoy them, but not like a diehard fan or anything, but this, honestly, this did a better job of selling the game to me than, say, the two trailers we've seen so far. So, having said that, I think it was nice to finally get that info, and it would probably serve them well to put out like a 4 or 5 minute, like, standard gameplay commentary video where it's really dressed up from the publisher, but, you know, something where they really break down and explain these core mechanics and you know, gameplay progression that would excite a lot of players in a way that they have not been able to see or hear about so far. Now, something very interesting that happened right before the Insomniac breach, which we will talk about in a second here, but this happened before that, which was the discovery of something going on internally at PlayStation in relation to Deviation games in a way. So if you remember the timeline here, the brief recap is that we knew Sony signed on with Deviation Games, a brand new studio founded by Jason Blundell and Dave Anthony, which are former Call of Duty Treyarch directors, producers, right? They're pretty well known. So it was a big deal that they founded a new studio and they were building this new IP, and PlayStation signed them on. But then we also know eventually, much recently, we saw first this happened in 2022, around mid-2022, where Jason Blundell, who co-founded the company with Dave Anthony, he left. We don't know where he went or what he was doing, but he left, and then May 2023, so this year, Deviation was hit with massive layoffs, which we kind of pieced together that the safe suggestion is that Sony probably backed out of that deal, and they had to, you know, they're still around, they're still kind of hiring and building the team back up, but we don't know exactly what happened outside of Sony probably dropped out of that deal. But now what happened recently was we saw JC Backfire, who's a creator, a streamer, and also a game designer, and he used to work at Deviation but was laid off during the May layoffs. He recently announced that he's now a junior game designer at PlayStation Studios, and he works for Jason Blundell, which at this point we did not know where Jason went and what he was up to. So over on Reset Era, looking into more from Siberia and Debt, it's been noticed that a handful of former Deviation Games developers, which were, you know, many of these people were also formerly from Activision and Treyarch, now they're working at Sony Interactive Entertainment, which we then saw JC confirm further on X that all he can say is he's now at PS Studios working on an unannounced project. So the big revelation here is that, you know, for Jason, he does tend to be very under the radar, no LinkedIn, no social media. So now we know he ended up at SIE with all these former Deviation developers or Treyarch developers. Maybe some were part of those layoffs, maybe some were poached. We don't know the exact circumstance, but they did find new work at PlayStation, and they're listing their work as just a more ambiguous, Sony Interactive Entertainment, right? And that's the more telling thing, right? They're more than welcome and allowed to put Sucker Punch, Naughty Dog, whatever other PS studio they might be working at. You just have to say, it's an unannounced AAA project. That's where things can sometimes slip if they say, it's a AAA FPS, and people can easily piece together what that might be or whatever the case is. But the fact that they're only putting it, listing it as SIE, Jason Blundell there, which he's a force to be reckoned with in this industry, being a game director on well-known properties like Call of Duty, right? And that was the big deal with him and Dave Anthony forming a new studio. So with what's going on here, there's a few conclusions being drawn, or the speculation running of maybe they're either building a brand new internal studio, maybe the whole sort of falling out with Deviation was that Jason did not care for the direction that Dave Anthony wanted to take the studio in that particular game that they were working on, and that led to Sony backing out of that deal. And Sony wanted Jason's vision for that project, and so they brought him in, and maybe they were able to retain the IP or something, and maybe Deviation is still able to keep the lights on by supporting this project. Maybe they are building a new internal team that is not meant to ship its own standalone title, but maybe they're playing a larger support role within SIE for other projects. There's a lot of ways this can go, so we'll leave it there because we just still don't really have enough to piece together exactly what this is, but it is something worth following closely now that we do know this is going on, right? So that's an interesting update on the Deviation story. I didn't think we were going to see much more here, but now the plot has thickened. All right, now let's get into the Insomniac Games breach, which we did cover initially on Tuesday when the breach happened, and that was something where it was kind of an emergency LTPS. Hey, this happened. A lot of stuff is coming out, so just be wary. Keep in mind that these things are out of context, and so if you see gameplay and whatever the case is, it was more of a warning kind of thing, right? And I had mentioned at the time we're not going to really talk about what did come out. And that's for a number of reasons, which as of right now, I mean, it's 1.67 terabytes. Stuff is still coming out because there are 1 million plus files to sift through. So people are trying to find references to PS5 Pro, PlayStation 6, of course, Insomniac's plans, which that is sort of the immediate stuff that came out between that and details regarding Wolverine. But I don't know, I guess I'm kind of surprised that one sort of consequence of the entire thing was this separate dialogue of a lot of game sites talking about the news, but also choosing to not publish the details of the breach, as in releasing the gameplay or publishing the content and the slides and all that stuff, which for many is being seen as hypocritical because those same sites were, publishing the details of, say, the Capcom leak. So it's a matter of, are we playing favorites and whatnot, which I didn't really think about at the time, but yeah, that I think it's a conversation worth having, or at least looking under the microscope of what is ethical and what's not ethical, and there's also comparisons to other mediums, and I feel like we could talk all day about this, but what I wanted to mention is at least where we stand on this channel and how we will be covering things like this, because these don't really happen too often, this kind of breach, and typically we don't cover, like direct third-party news unless there's some kind of PlayStation lien. So like we didn't touch on the Capcom stuff. We might have mentioned it in passing, I don't remember exactly, or like Grand Theft Auto 6, we did mention that like, that gameplay did come out, but I'm pretty sure I did not put that gameplay up because obviously Rockstar is kind of nutty with that stuff. But at least the one, I guess, comparison we can make here is when The Last of Us Part 2 leaked. What I did there was, okay, we're not going to touch the story leaks. I'm not going to talk about those. I mean, it's a very story-heavy game that I feel is important to not put those details out there. It's more of a personal choice for the direction of this channel, and if you want those details, there are other places that are going to give that to you. So in this case, I mean, that was kind of my immediate take on Tuesday, was that, in Here Now, we are not going to touch Wolverine plot details, cast, anything that came out about that game, but I did mention on Tuesday that it would be like very hard to discuss Insomniac for years to come regarding future projects when we have this, because what did leak was their internal roadmap for other projects that they are, assigned to work on, and what they plan to work on going into, well into 2035, right? So, it would be a bit weird to try and act like that did not happen when we discussed Insomniac, and that's why when it comes to the roadmap, we won't discuss it that much today, but I'm sure at some point we will touch on it. And the comparison I often see with this, I think this is worth mentioning too, like the film industry. We always get roadmaps from a lot of film studios about, hey, here's the next 6-7 movies that we're making, and some are scheduled 8-10 plus years away. Why does that industry do it and not games? But I guess with games, the one thing we can say is that games take 4 or 5 years to make in the AAA space, and oftentimes that is met with a lot of turbulent progress that is likely going to see a delay, and things get moved around. Sometimes a game can be 3 years into active development and then get canceled, as we saw with, say, The Last of Us Online. So at least with game studios, that is where they differ. Film studios can say, we're going to do this project, and as long as they at some point enter principal photography, chances are it's going to get released within a year or so. So I guess that's the one thing we can mention right now. But as far as, what we will be covering, primarily the PlayStation business, that stuff is always fascinating, and we're getting a lot of that. And so at least for the most pertinent, what I would consider noteworthy, or at least not harmful to the contents of certain games, that's where we will, bring up some of those news items, which even now what we can say is that there's so much coming out of this breach that if we wanted to, one, we're not going to cover everything. Things are still coming out, and two, just to safeguard the channel, we won't be publishing or displaying any of the actual content. So we will discuss certain aspects of it, but obviously we're not showing gameplay or any sort of alpha footage, vertical slices, none of that, because again, I think it's important, at least for the direction of the channel, is that for story contents and properly speculating on Wolverine to what might be considered a fun degree and not spoiling the game for a massive audience, which would be all of you, that's our decision here. If you want to see those things, you can probably go find that elsewhere, quite easily. But we won't be doing game contents, but if it's about the PlayStation business and it's a pertinent item that I think is worth discussing, that we will be doing. So having said that, we have a few news items relating to the breach, which would be, well, one, I thought this was interesting, which is sales data, which, for Insomniac Games, they're a very big established PlayStation studio that is going to have some correspondence with SIE. So we did get a lot of sales data, which is always worth, discussing when we don't get these hard numbers, which a lot of the numbers aren't really all that surprising, but I think some of the standout ones that people that people have brought up so far, Bloodborne is at 7.4 million copies sold, which is not a slouch by any degree. That's around Days Gone, which was also about 7 million copies, which I think also surprised a lot of people. But we always knew these games were high million sellers, right? Not multi-million, but they were certainly up there. So we have Bloodborne at 7.4 and still no remake, no proper remaster or native port. So I feel sorry for everyone that still wants more Bloodborne stuff. But the less common stuff that we don't hear about, Everybody's Golf VR, that sold 440,000 units. Astrobot VR did about 1 million, which that gives it an insanely high attach rate for total PSVR units. I thought that was worth mentioning. The Medieval remake did 500,000, so I think for an IP that many either nowadays don't know about or forgot about, or that's the one PlayStation IP that was a really surprising thing to see get remade, that did 500,000. Also Spiral 1 on PSN for PlayStation 3, that apparently we have that number, which was about 29,000. I think that's the total number there. Always worth mentioning that sometimes these things will be out of context, or we won't have the date from when these things were published or when they happen internally. And that's, I guess, another thing to mention right now, is that we won't discuss items from the breach if we don't feel confident in when and where they took place, or I don't want to also spread misinformation too, I guess would be the thing to bring up here. Going into game budgets, one thing that was immediately misunderstood was Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Its budget versus how much it made. Apparently, initially, people thought, it lost money, and that's why maybe we're not getting another Ratchet, or this is why, certain game companies make the decisions that they do. But Ratchet actually did it better than what people initially saw, and so the game did turn a profit. But going into game budgets, we do know Spider-Man 2 cost about $315 million to make. Rift Apart did cost about $81 million. Miles Morales was $156 million. Spider-Man Remastered was $39 million. I wanted to bring up these games because there's been some conversation around those numbers. They seem really high, like Spider-Man 2 at $300 million. Now, we know AAA games can get that high, especially in this current economic climate, when you're talking about salaries at $50,000 to $120,000 plus for some of those developers at these studios that should be paid a good amount, and they're working on a project for 4 or 5 years, and the headcount gets up to 300 on a project. Then there's also licensing for what is a very valuable property with Marvel, and they take a pretty sizable cut, which we were seeing from a lot of this info. So that's how these budgets can get pretty high. And so even something like Spider-Man Remastered, which you think, okay, that's a remaster, how is it up to $39 million? But again, accounting for the salaries alone, not just so much the technology and what goes into the programming process. It's more a matter of the pure salaries and labor that is going to, eat up a large portion of that. But we can see that Miles Morales at 156 million versus how much it sold was a highly profitable game, which that is something that goes into like what Sean Layden was discussing a while ago, is these ballooning AAA budgets for these massive single-player epics that need to move more than 5 million units at full MSRP to make money back, and how he thinks that's unsustainable. We should see more in this sort of stopgap space of like a Miles Morales or a Lost Legacy, where, they're not going to be as long, but they can be still, a high volume seller, and they're like more bite-sized projects that are easy for the team to sort of reuse assets and get something out in a faster turnaround time. And these numbers really highlight that I would love to see more of those, and I think a lot of people would as well. But going over to the business side, so there was internal company slides from this year that are only a few months old, and they reveal that Sony is looking to make budget cuts across PlayStation studios, even at Insomniac Games, where they're apparently trying to see a 50 to 75 staff reduction. And Insomniac's CEO, Ted Price, had written down an explanation about how this would be hard to achieve, given their current project roadmap, and that this could lead to disruption that hurts those games or possibly delay them, primarily by losing the institutional knowledge of moving around senior staff to, say, replace low-performing employees if there's performance reviews and let's say they're let go. And there was also a notes file that apparently references a recent November 9th PlayStation offsite meeting that mentions there will be at least one studio closure. Now, we're mentioning this because it seems like this very much was a recent meeting, not something where it goes back to, say, November 2022, which we could then line up and say, oh, well, that would have been the Pixel Opus closure. So apparently there is a studio closure on the way. So, that is unfortunate to hear, especially given that Sony is looking to, do staff reductions across various PlayStation studios. We had mentioned earlier that and this is from what I heard, but well before the breach, which is, Sony was doing a lot of budget cuts across the company when it came to, being a little bit picky on hiring for a lot of departments, not, stopping unnecessary travel and spending. I knew they were doing that for quite a bit, but it did seem like we were probably going to see some layoffs at some point. And so, maybe that will be the case, which is always a bit puzzling when you have a company performing as well on paper and making so much money, although there's always, these big companies have a lot of moving parts to them. Ideally, you would love to see these members not leave when the company is doing as well as it is doing, and trying to apply this pressure to, say, a studio like Insomniac, which has been a high performer. It's not great news, but for a studio closure, I think what we would be looking at is, gosh, I hate to say it, but it would have to be either Media Molecule, maybe London Studio. God, I would hate to say it, maybe Bend, and the only reason why I think maybe Bend is because maybe they were finally, because we know they're working on a new IP, but if they, prototyped and did a few vertical slices, and let's say none of those were pleasing the higher ups, maybe that's going to be what breaks the camel's back in this circumstance. I don't know. I feel like Media Molecule is probably what would happen. I really hope not, considering they were apparently just given the okay to start a new project. I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much. But it seems like we may be in store for something like this, which would be massively disappointing to see. But we'll have to, hold out and see what happens, because a big part of the breach is that there are so many things that are still it's going to be out of context, and plans can and do change. So that's why we're going to be very careful on what we decide to talk about out of everything that is getting published. Now, something else that came out that is not exactly surprising, so I think we're, okay to mention this, which would be PlayStation Plus. So we do have some internal slides that show Sony's sort of long-term 3.0 vision for PlayStation Plus and what they want to do with the service at some point, which the unsurprising portion here is that, big whoop, they want to eventually at some point make PlayStation Plus available to more devices that would be outside of PlayStation hardware. So that would be PC, mobile, smart TVs, offering streaming, being able to collaborate and expand value with other subscription services that could be part of a bundle for PS Plus. They're just looking to expand beyond, PlayStation hardware and secure new subscribers. Not only are these things, I guess, completely who didn't see that coming? But they're saturating on console, right? This is the Microsoft problem. This is very much a Sony problem. They still sit at around 45 to 50 million PS Plus subscribers at any given time. There is some turnover with they subscribe on PS4, but now they're just doing it on PS5. They're just sitting around the same number. The console market typically does not really grow in a meaningful way, and it hasn't for a very long time, so they are looking to expand at some point. I think the question is, how are they going to go about doing it, and when are they going to go about doing it, which I think would probably be in the next few years. Now, going outside of Breach news, that is still not very good, but we have the confirmation from Frank Marm of First Contact Entertainment over on X. But we've learned that apparently First Contact is the company is going to be closing. This is the developer of the Firewall Ultra series on PlayStation VR 2. They also did Firewall Ultra on PSVR, but it looks like they are shutting down, and it's been a really, really rough year for the games business. It really is something where it's just an incredible amount of people out of work, and also studio closures can be a part of that. And I hate to see one for a virtual reality developer. That's why a lot of them, I think it's the play if you're working at these studios and you can make that decision to sell, even if it has to be to Facebook or something, because it's just with how these games sell, it's a really tough cutthroat business, and it's so disappointing to see. And First Contact has not really properly confirmed this. This is the only way that we're hearing about it so far from Frank. But assuming it is true, this is a big loss to the VR space, even with Firewall Ultra apparently not being received that well. But I know a lot do like that franchise and the recent release on PSVR 2, but it's still an incredibly sad loss for sure. Now, moving on to our next news story, we have a very interesting Sony patent that they filed back in, it was sometime earlier this year, but they published it in July, and the patent family goes back to at least one from 2022, so as far as we know, this is a relatively new thing that they're looking at, but it's about an adaptive difficulty setting based on the player's skill in real time. So the patent name is Adaptive Difficulty Calibration for Skill-Based Activities in Virtual Environments, and it does what is implied, which will adjust the difficulty based on player skill. So as you're playing, they could either increase it or decrease it, which I would presume this is one of those system level things where maybe it would be baked into the PS5 SDK for developers to utilize, but if not, it could be some sort of retroactive thing where it will change the difficulty setting in the menu. So maybe it could be a developer mandate to make that happen and speak to each other software side for the system UI. And what I find interesting about this is that it's kind of going into what I would consider probably something that they're looking into for, maybe PS5, but I would think maybe the next generation of PlayStation 6. I'm sure a key principle of that console is going to be a lot of different accessibility options, as we've seen with this console cycle. And so PS5 has those game preset settings that were available on day one, being able to, possibly avoid spoilers or choosing your preference right away for performance or fidelity, and also your default difficulty setting, which is kind of a little crude setting to preset, but something where the second you boot up a game, the sort of default one that will be picked in the menu before you start a new game would be that particular setting. So I think this would be just a way to sort of evolve that concept further on, and so maybe we could see it on PS5, but I would have to say they're probably looking at a lot of these things going into PS6. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was the initial news story about the Insomniac breach, but then Wednesday we did exploring used PS3s from Facebook Marketplace, because that's what I had to do to try and do something like the PS1 and PS2 memory card video, is finding used consoles that were hopefully not reset. So you can go check that out. But otherwise, we're going into the holiday weekend. So if you celebrate, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. I might not have something ready on Tuesday because obviously given the holidays, I'm working on something, but it might not be done in time. So if not, then I will see you the following Friday. So that's all I've got for you. But that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.